From the land-grant University in Urbana-Champaign, Illinois, this is the Closing Market Report. It is the 7th day of March, 2025. I'm Extension's Todd Gleason. Coming up, we'll talk about the commodity markets with Mike Zuzolo. He's a globalcomresearch.com out of Atchison, Kansas. We'll hear about the Asian longhorned tick, an invasive species, and the issues it's creating for beef cattle producers in Illinois and across the nation. And then, as we close out our time together, we'll discuss the weather forecast with Eric Snodgrass from Nutrient Ag Solutions. And if you can stay with us through the whole of the hour today, you'll hear all of our Commodity Week program. Joe Jensen, agricultural economist and a member of the farmdoc team, presented the fundamentals of the marketplace on Tuesday at the All Day Ag Outlook. We'll hear his presentation in full if you can stay with us. Otherwise, it's up online right now at willag.org, and many of these radio stations will carry it over the weekend.
Todd Gleason's services are made available to WILL by University of Illinois Extension.
May corn for the day settled at $4.69 up 5 1/4. July $4.75 3/4. A nickel higher in December, up 3 1/4 cents. Settlement price there at $4.54 1/4. May beans $10.25 down 2 1/4. July off 3/4 at $10.38 3/4. And November soybeans at $10.25 1/2 up 4 3/4. Wheat futures in the July soft red 2 1/2 lower. Mike Zuzolo at globalcomresearch.com out of Atchison, Kansas, now joins us. He safely made it back to the home. Had to drive through, I suppose, some rain from the All Day Ag Outlook at the Beef House on Tuesday. Thank you for being there.
It was great. It was another great, successful meeting. Great people, great analysis, great leadership by you and University of Illinois. I wished I could have stayed till the end. But yeah, we had blizzard warnings in northeast Kansas when we were on the corn panel together, Todd, and that was when we were at about 60 degrees in Covington. So it was a crazy trip home. I diverted to St. Louis, spent the night with my daughter and son-in-law, and then came back early in the morning through some snowfall, but very glad I didn't try and drive all the way back because there's a lot of cars and jackknife trailers in St. Joe, Missouri on Wednesday morning. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to divert and make that trip to St. Louis, spend the evening with your daughter and son-in-law, and then I suppose off to Kansas City and then up north to St. Joe, or something along those lines to get back to Atchison. So thank you. You've had the rest of this week to take a look at the trade. Did it change your mind in any way on what you've been thinking?
No, it hasn't. I mean, we knew that this volatility was going to be tough to deal with. We knew the trade was going to be erratic, and I would say we could probably increase the amount of volatility and erratic trade behavior going forward because we are pretty much where we were when we started the week out. And so we could replicate with fresh tariff news what we did this week. I will say the charts look much better than they looked on Tuesday. One commodity that does look extremely healthy compared to Tuesday that we don't really talk a lot about is the live cattle. It did look like a capitulation type market, and Friday's close being up over 2% or 400 points on the day for April back cattle was a really nice move to close the week out. So they go into next week looking very healthy, both sentiment-wise, technically. As for the corn and beans, there's a couple big roadblocks right now that are probably going to keep us in the thicker mud at this point. And I think it's going to be the U.S.-Russia sanctions that are being talked about, and the idea that the U.S. could add more severe sanctions onto Russia. That could strengthen the dollar, weaken the emerging market currencies. We'll see if the crude oil market can compensate for that by going higher. Number two would be the WASDE report on Tuesday. The WAOB has made the announcement that they are going to try and put in new tariff numbers in the supply-demand tables. And so that's going to bring some added volatility and question marks to the trade, I suspect.
They will be doing that right up to the last moment because it changes day to day. That is some of the chaos that we're used to in the previous Trump administration. I am wondering how you deal with that. I was thinking about what to do. It's hard to market without having orders in consistently, and then you don't often sometimes hit the points that you're expecting because there's another announcement out of the Oval Office. How do you deal with that volatility and trying to position producers? What do they need to do?
The biggest thing we learned this week was early in the week before President Trump announced the physical tariffs when he did a press conference, and he said specifically that if China continues to weaken their currency to export their way out of the market and take business away from us, we're going to continue to increase tariffs. And so we have a very strong sense of what his modus operandi is going to be as far as taking care of bringing manufacturing back here and or bringing back the trade disparities and getting back some export business to the United States. That's number one. Number two, that goes right back to the dollar. And I think one of the biggest reasons why we did find quite a bit of support after Tuesday was mainly because the dollar plummeted and went through its 40-month moving average at the end of the week. It didn't stay below it, but it went below it. A new 4 to 5 month low was seen in the dollar index. At the same time, the Canadian dollar and the Mexican peso and some key trading partner currencies actually strengthened in the later part of the week against the dollar. That helps us a lot to keep our goods cheap, especially when supplies are tight. So that's number one. And I think number two is the March weather is going to probably dictate whether the funds want to be net sellers or net buyers. And the trade, in my opinion, thinks it's going to be very warm and wet in the Corn Belt. We're not going to have a drought. Those drought numbers did not say that, with 60% of our Corn Belt now in drought after this week's update and double what it was a year ago at this stage of the game. And so if we stay dry in March, I think that opens the upside up, or at least trims the downside when it comes to the corn and bean and wheat markets especially.
On that drought note, I asked Eric Snodgrass for later in this program about Mexico, just to remind us that they had really dry, droughty conditions last year, a poor corn crop. That seems to be a double-edged sword to me, related to how much corn they have imported from us in this marketing year, what the expectation might be for the coming marketing year if they were to recover. He thinks that they're still in a poor position at this point. How do you see that playing out? Tariffs on or off? I guess it's a difficult prospect, but Mexico is the number one importer of corn from the United States.
No, it is. And that's just another facet of why I'm more sincerely worried about China and the U.S. and us going up to 60% tariffs against China, because Chihuahua, Mexico in particular, from what I've been watching, has actually worsened since last year. And that's a very big area, but it's also a big livestock area. So we've got to be very careful about losing animals and therefore losing feed demand in the future. But as far as drought goes, they're not improving in some of the key areas. And so I'm less concerned that they're going to take us on with our agricultural exports. Whereas with China, especially with their updated numbers that came out Friday morning, Todd, their Jan-Feb imports overall in China that they brought in those 2 months down almost 8.5%, really spooked the market in the copper, especially on the close Friday morning. That was down 8.5% almost year over year. So it really does suggest the 2024 import pace that we saw really does look like more of a strategic reserve buildup. So every angle, or almost every angle I look at it right now, I'm more concerned about China when it comes to U.S. trade and U.S. agriculture trade specifically.
We'll ask you to keep track of that. Thank you much.
Thank you, Todd.
That's Mike Zuzolo. He's with GlobalComResearch.com out of Atchison, Kansas. Teresa Steckler, an extension beef cattle educator from the University of Illinois, now joins us. She's been working with beef producers in the state as it's related to tick populations and some of the dangers that they present for cattle herds. Thank you for taking some time with me, Teresa. Can you remind us about a tick that has moved into the state and what problems it creates?
Hi, Todd. It's good to talk to you again. Yes, that tick would be the Asian longhorn tick. It has been located in one county so far. However, the problem with this tick is it is parthenogenic, which means that it can reproduce without a male. So a single tick can turn into thousands in a short period of time.
And what issues does it create within a herd?
So what it can do, it can have so many ticks on a cow or heifer, whatever, that can actually cause exsanguination, or there could be so many bites that an allergic reaction can be caused in these animals as well.
So Really, the tale today is a cautionary one, I think, if I remember correctly, about transportation, checking animals that are coming into your herds, checking animals that are going out of your herds for the Asian longhorned tick.
Correct. We want people to be aware that if they're bringing any cattle in from it, tick has been found in Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, northern Arkansas, and a lot of states in the southeast and the east. If you're bringing any in, like backgrounders or buying bulls, cows, whatever, please quarantine those animals, pour them, and do a very vigilant check that they do not have any of these ticks. They're going to be small, and you have to be very careful when you go to check them. But be proactive, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Do they have any unique things about them, the way they look, that make them identifiable easily? And when you say small, how small?
They are very small. They're about the size of a poppy seed. But if the cattle have any large numbers, there's going to be clusters of them. And of course, as the ticks engorge themselves, they'll get much bigger. And typically, we see them around the udder, the brisket area, the ears, anywhere there could be folds of skin. The ticks like to get down in those areas.
And I suppose you want to be notified.
That would be fabulous. It's better to, get a hold of us, and I can actually get the ticks identified and make sure that it is or is not the Asian longhorn tick. And if you do have it, we can be proactive and try to lessen the impact that tick can have.
Do they need to isolate the animals if they find them?
It'll be a little bit, but yes, if we do find them, you do need to isolate those animals, and we need to pour those animals, and we need to work with your local herd veterinarian, and we also need to work with Illinois Department of Ag, and so we can hopefully get the tick under control as best as we can on your farm.
Teresa Steckler is a University of Illinois Extension beef cattle educator. If you'd like to learn more about the Asian longhorned beetle, you can search that out and look for the USDA invasive species pages. Let's turn our attention on this Friday afternoon now to the global growing regions, climate and weather. We're joined by Eric Snodgrass. He's with Nutrien Ag Solutions. Hello, Eric. Thank you for being with us today. We have a lot of ground to cover. Let's start with the rainfall that we did or did not have, depending on where you were in the state of Illinois, I guess, on Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. But we did have some. Can you kind of outline what happened?
Well, I'll tell you this. I heard from numerous growers across the state after that system went through. And I was out at Commodity Classic, and it was crazy windy out in the plains. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen synoptic level winds at that speed just ripping across an area. In other words, not from a thunderstorm. But, we had a big system roll across. And yes, it did. It hit a lot of places in Illinois. And I had several growers reach out and said, oh my gosh, that was what I needed. We're now just starting to really think about what spring's going to be, what planting's going to look like. But that rain was huge. Now, it also brought blizzard conditions. I'm not sure if you heard, but Iowa got hit hard with this, but they're not. Most of those folks in Iowa were like, that snow's going to melt. I'm going to get to keep some of that moisture. In fact, the southeast corner of Iowa picked up 2 to 3 inches of liquid out of all of this. So there were some very big positives there. But here's the thing, Todd. It's March. I have not changed my big concerns with our lack of subsurface soil moisture. I've not really I've not really seen a lot that's got me. In other words, I've not seen anything yet that has this drought worry off the back of my mind. But I'll say this. If we could get 6 additional storm systems like I just saw before April 4th, we will not be talking about drought at all. Now, we're all going to hate that because it's going to be just like one or two every week just ripping across the country. But that could undo a lot of the major drought risks that I think we see, especially to our west, going into this 2025 planting season. So, Todd, I'm happy March is coming in hot. It's coming in with multiple waves hitting the West Coast. Our next big one will probably be around the 14th, 15th of the month. I'm talking another big storm system coming through. But we need to keep them coming in order to beat back this drought risk.
I'm just happy it's coming in warmer.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we're going to out ahead of this big system next week. I mean, this next one's going to be big, Todd. I think it's a lot of severe weather down south. It's probably going to be big snows for the northern plains, which are still in snow drought, parts of the upper Midwest, which need more snow. But this one, as it comes across us, just watch the temperatures each day continue to climb. My kids are pretty pumped because I told them early next week they're going to get in the 70s. But remember, when we get warm this time of year, it almost always gets windy too. So we'll have some pretty strong winds out of the south ahead of this next big system. But just be prepared when it comes through us late next week that we could be talking about the risk of strong to severe storms, heavy rain, and again, blizzard conditions on the backside.
Okay, so that's 1, 2. Is there a third storm that you're thinking about?
I'm hoping so, Todd. I really am. I would like to see the atmosphere do this again and again and again, honestly, as we work our way to the end of the month. But there is a part of this we have to consider, okay? Each of these storm systems, they've missed Texas. They've missed parts of Oklahoma, parts of Kansas, parts of Colorado. And if you didn't see this earlier in the week, behind these previous two systems, there have been dust storms that came out of New Mexico and hit Texas that were the size. The dust storms themselves were the size of the state of Illinois. So we know that there's problems. We know that there's drought in Mexico. We know that the next 15 days, Kansas is not expected to pick up any of this moisture. So you just start thinking about the haves and the have-nots. And to be honest with you, as we slide towards spring, or we're actually technically in it, but as we slide toward the spring that we really need to be thinking about, I think it's going to be a situation where if you're east of the Mississippi, we're going to be looking at more routine rains and possibly much tighter than normal windows. I think if you're west of the Mississippi, we're just going to be concerned about, can we bring in enough spring moisture? And I'll tell you this, Todd, I don't know if I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but my friends and colleagues, Andrew Pritchard, I think I mentioned to you before, they're all targeting Ohio Valley. They're all targeting the Southeast for storm chasing. And not a lot of them are talking about, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska. So again, if you start hearing Andrew talk about wanting to chase storms out in Kansas, that is a major, major positive signal that this risk of summer drought in the Central Plains starts to back off, which means it doesn't encroach on the Mississippi by the time we get to July.
Most assuredly, we will know on WILL if Andrew is chasing, because he's
right.
on WILL every day with our local weather
That's right.
forecast. I want to go back to something you mentioned just in passing,
Okay.
the drought in Mexico, because they are the number one importer of corn from the United States. They had a drought last year. Was that in the primary areas of corn production? I think it was.
Yeah.
Had a big impact. What do you see for them this spring and summer?
Well, their biggest problem was this winter, there was no subtropical jet. That's the piece that comes from Hawaii. So one of their biggest kind of regions of the Chihuahua region, that is a spot that's been in drought. It extends all the way toward the Baja of California as well. And so what we just worry about is if that's there, I mean, it was there in 2011. Okay, and it spread into Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas throughout that summer of 2011. So it's interesting, Todd, here in Illinois, we're always like, oh, the drought of 12. You go to Texas, it's like, oh, the drought of 11. That's the one that they remember most recently. So unless we can get that all knocked out soon, we're going to be looking at some trouble here as that spreads to the north. And by the way, we did just get all new seasonal model data in this week too. And the newest European model is trying to paint more of the Great Basin, so that's out in the Intermountain West, more of the central states in the U.S., talking about the plains there, up to parts of the southern Canadian prairie as having the greater risk on being hotter and drier this summer. So, that kind of forecast from that model backs up what you and I have been talking about for weeks, that just says that Mississippi River, if you're to the west of it, the farther west you go, the greater the risks are for heat and drought. The farther east you go, I think it's going to be a discussion of tight spring windows, and we'll just see if the moisture hangs on long enough to buy us time during summer.
We are only 24 days from April. What do you see for that month in the Midwest?
Okay, I don't like what I'm about to tell you, Todd, and that is there is some evidence that at the end of March and the start of April, I'm not sure on the timing yet, but I'm basing this off of some cadence with a few other things, that we could be looking at another shot at some chilly air coming in, maybe for 4 or 5 days, right? Now, the worry is that if we see that at the beginning of April and the pattern stays on its similar cadence to what it's been on, then that would mean we'd have another cool shot at the beginning of May. Now, we don't want our seed to sit in cold, wet ground when we plant it, right? And so I'm not settled on this. I'm just letting you know that there seems to be a little bit of a cadence to the temperature pattern that If it persists, I just see some cooler weather at times that will come kind of not at the right time, but when we want to get a crop established. But I am more than prepared to be wrong on that. Maybe we've broken out of that. But if I can tell you the worry, Todd, what if we blow open the doors really, really warm and we just get warm for the rest of spring and stay there? That's not good either. You've got to keep the temperature contrast up in spring, because if you do, you keep the jet stream around longer. You don't want to blow the doors open hot in spring because it can ruin the flow for summer. That's exactly what happened in 2012. So Todd, I have a lot on my mind, if you couldn't tell, because there's just so many moving pieces as we start to get into this next season.
We'll check on things again next week. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet.
Eric Snodgrass is with Nutrien Ag Solutions, joined us here on the Closing Market Report for this Friday afternoon. Stay with us for the whole hour if you can. You'll hear all of our Commodity Week program. Today, we'll hear from the All-Day Ag Outlook and the fundamental outlook that Joe Jensen, farmdoc team member, agricultural economist from the U of I, presented on Tuesday of this week. If not, you can always find it online right now at willag.org, willag.org.
Todd Gleason's services are made available to WILL by University of Illinois Extension.
Welcome to Commodity Week. I am Todd Gleason. Today, we'll hear from the All-Day Ag Outlook recorded on Tuesday, March the 4th at the Beef House in Covington, Indiana. Joe Jensen, agricultural economist from the University of Illinois, set the tone for the day by laying out the fundamental picture of corn and soybeans in the United States, usage, and the impact of global stocks and trade. Now, here's Joe.
I'm going to just sort of talk through the situation as it stands, where we're at. I think the watchword of the day would be uncertainty. I think a lot of people have sort of heard that word sort of thrown around a lot. There are these like market sentiment or consumer sentiment indices. You'll hear about these. These will kind of always make news when they get released. Basically, what they do is they ask, sort of, what is your opinion on the current situation in business or employment or sort of consumer spending, your own spending, your own sort of personal financial situation? And it's usually sort of like they ask a person, they say, is it positive, neutral, or negative? People weigh in, and we aggregate that across lots and lots of people, and we kind of get a sense of, sort of how are people feeling about the economy. A lot of you may have seen Purdue does something very similar for ag. The folks over in Purdue Ag Econ, which is a useful and sort of interesting thing that I look at. I don't know what it really means. 8 years ago, it spiked in November of 2016. It did that again last November. I'm very interested to sort of see where we go with that sort of idea of like sentiment. But I think there's a sort of a sense in which like a lot of our ag economy is kind of, driven by sort of sentiment and vibes at the moment. And I think hopefully we want to put something a little more solid, some more meat on those bones.
Joe Jensen is an agricultural economist and a member of the farmdoc team. He spoke earlier this week at the All-Day Ag Outlook at the Beef House in Covington, Indiana. You may hear more from him online at willag.org, willag.org, or just by looking for the Commodity Week podcast in your favorite podcast application, or by staying tuned to this radio station over the weekend. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason.